Bumpy watched it all without comment. He understood something most men didn't: power that needs reinforcement is already weakening. Still, one unresolved thread remained, not external but internal. The man in Newark. The trusted one. The almost traitor. Bumpy called him in. No guards. No tension. Just a conversation. The room smelled of stale smoke. Old decisions. "You know why you're still alive?" Bumpy said. The man nodded. "Because you wanted to watch." Bumpy shook his head. "Because you're useful." That hurt more. "You'll carry messages," Bumpy continued, "but never opinions." The man accepted. He had no choice. Survival had redefined his ambition. That closed the last internal loop. By the end of the year, Harlem functioned like a machine. Smooth. Predictable. Profitable. Outsiders mistook that for weakness. They were wrong. This wasn't peace. It was balance enforced by memory. And Bumpy knew balance never lasts forever. Because time does what rivals can't. It waits. Time doesn't negotiate. It collects. Years passed the way they always do in Harlem, quietly on the surface, violently underneath. Bumpy aged into his authority. Not louder. Not softer. Sharper. Men stopped testing him because they'd seen what happened to those who did. No blood. No drama. Just disappearance from relevance. That was the real legacy of the Schultz decision. Not the hit. The order. Because ordering violence is different from committing it. One creates fear. The other creates hierarchy. Bumpy understood that better than anyone. Then the state stepped in. Prison doesn't break powerful men. It freezes them. And when Bumpy was sent away, the streets didn't explode. That was the proof he built something durable. The structure held, but structures without architects eventually get redesigned. Alcatraz stripped time down to essentials. Steel doors. Routine. Silence that lasted longer than conversations ever did. The cold metal of the bars reminded Bumpy daily of one truth. Power doesn't disappear when you're gone. It gets reassigned. He paid attention. That's what saved him later. When he walked out in 1963, Harlem looked familiar, and wrong. Same streets. Same buildings. Different gravity. The Italians hadn't invaded. They'd settled. Quietly. Legally enough. With men who smiled too easily. The Genovese influence was everywhere. Not violent. Administrative. They controlled flow, not corners. Paper, not pistols. This was the final knowledge loop closing. What happens when the architect returns to find his building occupied? Bumpy didn't rage. Didn't threaten. Didn't remind anyone who he was. He listened. The same way he always had. Men rushed to tell him stories. Who did what? Who betrayed whom? Who thought what? They spoke fast, eager to prove relevance. Bumpy let them. Memory again. He understood immediately. The Italians hadn't taken Harlem from him. They'd taken it for him, then forgotten why he mattered. That was their fatal mistake. They assumed time had erased reputation. It hadn't. It had sharpened it. Bumpy didn't demand territory. He demanded acknowledgement. Not loudly. Strategically. Meetings happened. Terms were revisited. Old understandings resurfaced. Nobody wanted war. That was the irony. His absence had taught everyone the value of quiet stability. The balance reset, not to the past but to something colder. More corporate. More cautious. That's the version history remembers as conflict. But the truth was simpler. It was negotiation under memory. Every loop closes here. The betrayal in Newark? Weaponized. The Schultz hit? A message, not an ending. The Italian alliance? A lease, not ownership. The prison years? A test of whether power was loud or embedded. Bumpy passed every one. He never needed to fire the last shot. He never needed the last word. Because real power doesn't announce victory. It survives replacement. The lesson is uncomfortable and timeless. If you want control, build fear. If you want longevity, build systems. But if you want legend, make yourself irreplaceable. That's what Bumpy Johnson did. And if you think this was dangerous, wait till you hear what happened when he walked back into Harlem unarmed, surrounded by men who thought they'd already won. Like the video if you understood the power play. Comment below, is real power taken or patiently collected? Subscribe. The next story starts with a handshake and ends with silence. And Dutch read silence wrong. Dutch believed Harlem's calm meant fear. That was his fatal strategic mistake. Bumpy's people noticed everything. Which clubs Dutch's men visited. Which corners they avoided. Which nights they stayed sober. Which names they asked for. This detail will matter soon. Bumpy didn't meet with his crew all at once. That would look defensive. Instead he talked to them separately. Short conversations. Few words. Stay normal, he told one. Let them feel safe, he told another. Power didn't shift in meetings. It shifted in routines. The streets stayed quiet. That made Dutch impatient. He escalated. A warning was delivered downtown. Harlem numbers runners were harassed. Not beaten. Just reminded. Dutch wanted reaction. He didn't get one. That was when Dutch decided Harlem needed a lesson. What he didn't know was that Bumpy had already chosen not to spill blood. Not yet. Bumpy understood something Dutch didn't. Killing men only solved today. Humiliation solved years. And Dutch had made himself visible. The trusted man from the back room delivered Bumpy's message exactly as instructed. Harlem heard you. Dutch laughed when he heard it. He thought it meant compliance. That's good, Dutch said. Means he knows. Dutch didn't ask what Harlem had heard. He assumed. That assumption sealed it. Behind the scenes, Bumpy began shifting pressure. Not on Dutch directly. On his supply lines. On the people who thought they were invisible. One club owner stopped receiving shipments on time. One accountant misplaced numbers. One messenger got cold feet. No violence. No threats. Just uncertainty. Dutch's operation relied on certainty. On speed. On intimidation. When things slowed down, his men got nervous. Nervous men made mistakes. We'll return to that. By the end of the week, Dutch felt something he wasn't used to. Silence. No retaliation. No negotiations. No begging. Harlem was still running. Still profitable. Still calm. Too calm. Dutch decided it was time to remind Bumpy Johnson who held the real power. He ordered something bold. Public. Undeniable. He wanted Harlem to feel it. What he didn't realize was that the moment he chose spectacle, he surrendered control. And Bumpy was waiting for exactly that. Dutch Schultz didn't believe in quiet victories. If power wasn't visible, he didn't trust it. So when Harlem stayed calm, Dutch assumed deception. He assumed Bumpy Johnson was stalling. Buying time. Looking for allies he didn't have. That assumption pushed Dutch toward a move he believed was decisive. He ordered a sit-down. Not with Bumpy. With Harlem itself. The message was delivered publicly. Too publicly. Dutch's men let it be known they were collecting temporary fees from clubs north of 135th Street. Not taking over. Just reminding everyone who could if he wanted. This detail will matter soon. Bumpy heard about it before the first dollar changed hands. He always did. Harlem spoke to him without phones. He didn't react. Instead he went home. That night, Bumpy sat alone at his table. No guards. No meetings. Just a single lamp and a glass he didn't finish. He thought about his mother. About the rules she taught him when he was a boy in South Carolina. Never rush anger. Never let them see you decide. This wasn't sentiment. It was strategy. Dutch's threat wasn't about money. It was about humiliation. About making Harlem bend publicly. About proving that even Bumpy Johnson answered to someone. Bumpy knew something Dutch didn't. Harlem didn't need to win loudly. It only needed Dutch to lose quietly. That was the power loop. The next morning, Bumpy sent word to exactly 3 people. Not his strongest men. Not his most violent. His smartest. Each received a simple instruction. Watch who gets nervous. No more. By midweek, Dutch's men were uneasy. Collections weren't smooth. Club owners complied but too easily. Nobody argued. Nobody resisted. That wasn't normal. Fear always made noise first. Dutch noticed the lack of resistance and misread it again. He thought the city was submitting. So he escalated once more. A message reached Bumpy indirectly. Not a threat this time. A deadline. Dutch wanted a meeting. Neutral ground. Downtown. He wanted Bumpy to walk into his territory and acknowledge the hierarchy. Bumpy read the message once. Then burned it. He didn't plan to go. But he planned to let Dutch think he might. That night, Bumpy walked Harlem alone. No escort. No show. He stopped into clubs, nodded to men who pretended not to notice him. Jazz played. Drinks poured. The city breathed. The sound mattered. It told him Harlem wasn't afraid. What he didn't know yet, what nobody knew yet, was that Dutch had already made his final mistake. Dutch had trusted the wrong man. The same one from the back room. The betrayal loop tightened. That man, shaken by his first encounter with Bumpy, had tried to play both sides. Reporting selectively. Softening truths. Protecting himself. But Dutch smelled uncertainty. And uncertainty was something Dutch punished. Dutch confronted him. Accused him of withholding. The man broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. He told Dutch something small. He said, Bumpy didn't look scared. That was enough. Dutch decided the man was useless. He ordered him followed. Not killed. Wash. That decision changed everything. Because the man noticed. And when he noticed, he ran. Straight back to Harlem. Straight back to Bumpy Johnson. This was the knowledge loop snapping shut. The man arrived just before dawn. Breathing fast. He didn't speak at first. Just held out a piece of paper. Names. Times. Locations. Dutch's next move. Bumpy read it slowly. Then folded it once. Nobody knew he'd planned for this. Dutch thought he was applying pressure. What he'd actually done was reveal his entire hand. Bumpy finally smiled. Not because he was about to strike, but because he wouldn't have to. The confrontation didn't happen in a room full of men. That's what Dutch expected. It happened in an office that smelled faintly of paper and ink. No guards visible. No weapons shown. Just 2 chairs and a desk that had seen better years. Downtown. Early afternoon. Bumpy Johnson arrived alone. That alone shifted the balance. Dutch Schultz was already there standing by the window. He didn't turn right away. He wanted Bumpy to feel like he was being evaluated. Like this was an audience. Dutch spoke first. You took your time. Bumpy sat without asking. The chair scraped once against the floor. The sound was sharp. Final. Harlem's patient, Bumpy said. Dutch smiled. Thin. Confident. He turned and finally looked at him. Dutch believed this was the moment Harlem bent. That belief was his fatal mistake. Dutch moved closer, slow, predatory. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I gave you a chance, Dutch said. You ignored it. Bumpy met his eyes. Come. So. I heard you, Bumpy said. Dutch leaned back against the desk. Crossed his arms. Then you know how this ends. This detail will matter soon. Dutch thought the meeting was about territory. Bumpy knew it was about exposure. Bumpy reached into his coat. Dutch's eyes flicked there. Not enough to show fear. Just enough to show interest. Bumpy placed a folded paper on the desk between them. Didn't slide it. Didn't push it forward. Just placed it. Dutch didn't touch it at first. What's that? Dutch asked. You're weak, Bumpy said. Silence filled the room. The kind that pressed on the ears. Dutch unfolded the paper. His expression didn't change immediately. He was disciplined. But his breathing did. What? Then again. Names. Routes. Safe houses. Times when men were alone. Times when they weren't. Not a threat. A mirror. Dutch looked up slowly. You think this scares me? Bumpy shook his head once. No, he said. I think it explains you. Dutch laughed. Sure. You gonna kill me with paper? Bumpy leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive. Intentional. I'm not here to kill you. That landed. Dutch straightened. This was the twist. Dutch had prepared for violence. For posturing. For negotiation under threat. He wasn't prepared for restraint. Bumpy continued. You came loud, he said. You came visible. You came certain. Dutch said nothing. That works, Bumpy said, until someone decides not to play your game. Dutch's jaw tightened. You think you've won? Bumpy stood. This was the power flip. I think you already lost, he said. Bumpy turned toward the door. Dutch snapped. You walk out that door, Dutch said. This becomes war. Bumpy stopped. Didn't turn around. This already passed war, he said. This is accounting. That was the moment. Dutch understood, not fully but enough. He realized the collections weren't stalling by accident. The nervous men weren't coincidence. The silence wasn't submission. It was isolation. Dutch's power came from momentum. From fear that moved faster than thought. Bumpy had slowed it. Dutch had one move left. He could call for blood. He didn't. That hesitation cost him everything. Bumpy opened the door. One last thing. Dutch, he said. Dutch looked up. You threatened Harlem, Bumpy said. Harlem answered. Bumpy left. No gunfire. No shouting. No deal signed. Just a door closing. And the sound of Dutch Schultz alone with his thoughts. The city would feel this before nightfall. But not the way Dutch expected. That night nobody died. That's what made it terrifying. Dutch Schultz waited for retaliation. For shots. For fires. For headlines. Violence at least would have made sense. Instead, the city went quiet in the wrong places. The first sign came from his own people. One runner didn't show up. No call. No excuse. Just gone. Not dead. Just absent. Another showed up late, sweating, apologetic, over-explaining. That was new. By midnight, 3 more missed check-ins. Nothing dramatic. No blood. Just gaps. This detail will matter soon. Dutch paced his office. The floorboards creaked under his weight. That sound, familiar, repetitive, started to feel smaller. He picked up the phone. Called a lieutenant. No answer. He called another. Busy. Dutch slammed the receiver down. This wasn't fear spreading outward. It was fear collapsing inward. Downtown bosses started asking questions. Quiet ones. Why were shipments delayed? Why were collections uneven? Why were Harlem numbers still running clean while Dutch's routes tangled? Nobody accused him directly. That was worse. Accusations invited defense. Silence invited doubt. Dutch had built his reputation on decisiveness. Now every delay looked like weakness. By morning, word moved through the underworld without ever being spoken. Dutch Schultz was being measured. Men who'd once rushed to his side suddenly remembered appointments elsewhere. Meetings got postponed. Drinks were declined. Power doesn't vanish. It leaks. Harlem, meanwhile, stayed calm. Clubs opened on time. Music played. Money moved. No extra muscle. No show of force. That contrast unsettled everyone watching. People began to understand what had happened. Bumpy Johnson hadn't challenged Dutch. He'd made him irrelevant. The most dangerous consequence wasn't loss of territory. It was loss of certainty. Dutch no longer knew who was with him because nobody needed to prove loyalty anymore. Fear had changed direction. Dutch tried to recover. He sent messages. Softened tone. Offered discussions. Suggested compromise. Too late. That was the moral loop closing. He had chosen intimidation when patience would have worked. He had chosen spectacle when invisibility would have protected him. Now every move he made felt reactive. Bumpy didn't respond to any of it. That silence was intentional. It told everyone watching that Harlem didn't need to explain itself. By the end of the week, Dutch's name still carried weight, but it no longer carried inevitability. That distinction mattered. Men stopped flinching when they heard it. They listened, calculated, decided. That's how power ends. Not with a scream. With a pause. Dutch sat alone one evening, staring at a ledger that no longer added up. Whiskey burned harder than usual. The room felt smaller. He realized then what Bumpy had done. He hadn't taken Dutch's empire. He'd left it standing hollow. Dutch could still order violence. He could still spill blood. But blood wouldn't fix doubt. And doubt was already everywhere. Outside, the city moved on. Harlem slept. Years later, men would argue about that week. They'd count bodies that never fell. They'd look for a shootout that never came. They'd ask how a threat that loud ended without blood. They missed the point. The real ending happened quietly. Dutch Schultz didn't fall that week. Not officially. He kept his name. His suit stayed sharp. His voice stayed confident in rooms that still let him speak. But something had changed. When he talked, men listened differently. They didn't lean in. They didn't rush. They waited. That waiting was the verdict. Bumpy Johnson never claimed victory. Never marked territory. Never announced terms. Harlem didn't need an announcement. It already knew who had steadied the ground when pressure came. That was the final knowledge loop closing. The trusted man, the one who had brought the threat, disappeared from the story. Not killed. Not punished publicly. He lived long enough to understand what mercy felt like when it was strategic. That was the moral loop. Bumpy had spared him because fear teaches faster when it's paired with survival. Dutch's fatal mistake wasn't threatening Harlem. It was believing power lived in fear alone. He underestimated patience. He underestimated silence. He underestimated a man who didn't need to prove anything. By choosing not to spill blood, Bumpy had done something far more damaging. He had exposed the difference between dominance and control. Dominance demands attention. Control doesn't. Harlem understood that lesson. Downtown learned it too, though fewer admitted it out loud. From that point on, threats aimed at Harlem softened before they arrived. Messages rerouted. Deals reconsidered. Not because Bumpy Johnson was feared, but because he was respected. That distinction lasted longer than any gunshot. If you listened carefully to old men in back rooms years later, you'd hear the line repeated without embellishment. Dutch tried to take Harlem. Pause. Harlem answered. That was the legend. The moral was simpler. Real power doesn't rush. Real power doesn't shout. Real power makes the other side doubt itself. And if you think this story was dangerous, wait until you hear what happened when Bumpy Johnson walked into a room unarmed, and everyone else reached for nothing. If you respect this kind of power, like the video. If you'd have chosen blood instead, say why in the comments. And subscribe, because the next story starts with a man who thought reputation was enough.